And it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Vince Crichton. Vince Crichton, for 40 years, was a wildlife biologist and the moose man. They call him Doc Moose in Manitoba. He now does work all across the country on moose. He's a very much in demand moose expert. There's probably nobody in North America that knows any more about moose than Vince Crichton. Vince has been on TV on the Discovery Channel. He just recently did some videos that you can find up on YouTube. If you Google Doc Moose on YouTube, you'll probably, or Vince Crichton, you'll find these videos that he did with his daughter, and very enjoyable, and you learn lots about moose. Vince and I have a kind of a shared background in one sense, and it's the reason why Carmen asked me to introduce Vince today. Back in 1977, I bought a small fly-in fishing lodge in northern Manitoba, and I ran it for many years, and we had lots of moose up there. Remember, this is 1977, and there was a moose biologist in the province who was quite well known in those days. His name was Vince Crichton. When I heard that Vince was coming to this thing today, I thought, geez, that guy's been at it a long time. Of course, I decided that owning a fly-in fishing lodge was not nearly as much fun as being a lawyer. So I went back to school and became a lawyer, and after that became a politician. And I know what you're thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking. What the hell? Yeah, some days I think that too. But anyhow, Manitoba was a wonderful place to work in and to live in, and I raised my kids in northern Manitoba, and we caught a lot of fish, and we killed some moose up there, Vince, and they were big moose. They were not Shirris moose. They were big moose. But it's a great pleasure to introduce somebody who is such an expert in his field, and I know he has a very interesting presentation to make to us. Dr. Vince Crichton.
I carry this. I got a little surprise for you in here. Anyway, thank you very much, Bill. One correction I will make on that series, it's not with my daughter, it's with my granddaughter. And it's called Doc Moose, the series, and it's a 4-part series. She did all of the voiceover in it, very major participant in the whole thing. She's in there from the day she was born to being in the bush with me in diapers to a 13-year-old, now 14-year-old. But anyway, wow, what a gathering. I was just dumbfounded when I found out yesterday there'd be almost 500 people at this thing. And so I'm pretty confident that when you walk out of here at the end of this presentation day, you're going to know more about moose than you did when you walked in here. Now, I call this the moose world with the man who would be moose, and I'll talk a little about that later. But I have my boot here. The reason I've got my boot there is 2 reasons. A, I've covered a lot of country in gathering information relative to moose. I've seen over 30,000 in my, up to this point in time, many of which were doing aerial surveys in Manitoba. And the other thing is that, when you get a pebble in your boot, it's kind of a bit of an irritant. Well, I'm going to be a bit of an irritant here today, especially to those people that are in the political field, to indicate to them that, we're managing wild ungulates out there free. It's not cattle inside a fenced-in area, with one bull to do the breeding. And we're going to talk a little bit about sex here today too. Whoops, I got to point it this way. Okay, now, moose were not always here. I was out in eastern Siberia at the invite of the USSR Academy of Science a number of years ago, and this is where, actually 2008 when I was here, this is where our moose came from. And now if you go back about 250 million years ago. It looks like they originated down in this neck of the woods over here in the northern part of Italy. And now, how they got to North America? Via the Bering Land Bridge. And that was a bridge between Asia and Alaska that was about 1,500 miles wide, and it disappeared about 12,000 years ago, give or take a year or two. And then what happened, Moose, as the big ice sheets melted, they moved down the Rocky Mountain Trench here, down probably in this neck of the woods where we are here today, and we had the large Cordilleran ice sheet to the west and the Laurentide over to the east. And as vegetation facilitated their movement down there, this is how they moved down and stratified themselves out on the south side of the ice sheets. So today we have the Alaska Yukon moose, the Shiras moose down here in this neck of the woods in northwestern states. We have the Eastern Canada moose over here, and we have the Western Canada moose. The type specimens for that one was described by the late Randolph Peterson in the Spruce Woods area of Manitoba. Whoops, a daisy, I got a bit too fast here. There. As the ice sheets melted, there was a movement over this way into northeastern U.S. and up into Canada, and a major migration route up here. And this is from Randolph Peterson's book, 1955, called The Moose Book. But you'll notice that this branch came off here. Now, there's a really interesting difference between the Eastern Canada moose and the Western Canada moose, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about this hump here, what's the reason for it, and bulls during the rutting period, in the summertime they have a really light-colored nose. In about August the 20th, it starts to change to as testosterone levels increase for the ensuing rut, and it turns to a dark brown or blackish color, and as bulls get older, this rope portion falls and drops off. Here is the important thing to notice: the difference between the Eastern Canada moose and the Western Canada moose and the Alaska and the Shiras moose is the inside edge of the palm here is parallel to the long axis of the nose. If you go east, if you go east to where I come from in northern Ontario, where I followed the footsteps of my dad into this game, you'll notice it's a light-colored nose on this bull during the summer period. This is down the river at Chapleau. He's an older bull. The rope portion is gone. But the inside edge of that palm is uplifted about a 40-degree angle to the long axis of the nose. Now, the reason for that big hump on the back also, these are the vertebrae right in that area of the hump. And this is where those big ligaments that hold that, or the large ligaments that hold that big head up, that are attached to in the thoracic region, right behind the skull. They're not very big there, and as they get back into the body, they get smaller and smaller, or the process gets smaller and smaller. This is one of the bells. I was following a moose track in the bush one day. Lo and behold, there was the bell that had fallen off. Now the cows, they've still got that big hump here. They have a less robust bell than the bulls do, and her nose stays that color throughout the year. And whereas the bulls starts to change around August the 20th each year. Now, how do you sex moose when their antlers are dropped? Well, you got to get a look at the south end of a moose when it's heading north. And the cows have a white vulva patch, and that's a dead giveaway when they don't have antlers on, how we go about sexing them. Now, we see different color variations. A white cow with a dark calf. These ones here, incidentally, came from the Prince George area in British Columbia here. This is a population east of where I come from in Northern Ontario. You may have heard of Timmins and Chapleau, or about halfway between. They've been there since I ran that country as a young biologist working for my dad. Now, one of the other interesting things, if you let your fingernails grow for a month or so, they get pretty long. Well, this is the hooves of a bull over here during the rutting period when he's wandering around and looking for some little sweetie out there. They get worn off, versus the cows have a much more pointed hoof on them. And during the course of the winter, the rounded hoof of the bulls becomes more pointed as it grows. Antlers, I've always been fascinated with them. We have this is one I took a number of years back now, but we have the split or butterfly type antler where you've got the main palm here, you've got the brow palm here in this indentation, whereas you have the full palm where there is no indentation between the main palm and the brow palm. Now remember this, these are antlers, they're not horns. I get so upset when you look at some of these hunting channels and some guide or somebody saying, oh, well, look at the horns on this thing. They're not horns. I gave a presentation a couple years back at Idea City conference in Toronto, and I was amazed at the number of people. They said, we thought those things kept growing every year. They don't. They're shed and they're cast. I'll learn here in a minute how to operate this thing. I know from looking at this is just a year and a half old, and I know this is about a 2.5-year-old. But once you get up above that to the bigger animals, it's just a wild guess as to how old this is without looking at the teeth. Now, what happens as animals get older? This is a 10.5-year-old animal. They may still have the width on them, but the mass decreases substantially. When you watch on some of these channels, channels you see with moose, I always pay attention to the mass that's on these animals. These are what you see on the prime bull. These are defensive guys. They just got to rock and roll to these young bulls or to these older guys, and they put the boots right to them. Whereas if they come up against an animal of the same social rank with something like this, that's when we have a bit of a tussle. And you see some real anomalies. Something like this here. I happen to have this at home. This is from a castrated bull. And when they become castrated, they lose the regular set of antlers and they'll start growing something like this that they'll never shed again in their lifetime. And it almost looks like coral. This is a friend of mine sent me this photograph from Alaska. We have problems with deer in the city of Winnipeg. They got the same problem with moose in the city of Anchorage. This animal was likely hit by a car and damaged the testicular area. And what happens to them, over time in the bush, they're eaten by rodents and rabbits and porcupines and things like that, and eventually are just assimilated back into the environment. By about the end of the first week of December, they shed their antlers, and this was one that was I think it was around around December the 10th, and I found a head in the bush one day, and I was going to go back to my truck and get the saw to saw it off. And so one antler was gone, but as I walked by the other one, I hit it with my hand and it popped off. Well, you can see what happened here. Here's the center part that is still firmly attached, but there's particular cells that invade this area and they've eaten away the bone, and that's what happens to facilitate the antler being cast. This is on April the 6th. On April the 19th, I saw that animal again, and his antlers were about 20 inches long. These things grow about an inch or so every day, one of the fastest growing tissues that we know of. And this is what they look like in their prime. This is a large prime bull on the Labor Day weekend, and You'll see the white marbling. You see this on mostly on the large bulls, this white marbling. We're not really sure what the function of it is. Sometimes it looks like growth lines, but almost always there. And then they start shedding just around September 5th or 6th. And whoops. This young fella here, he had a full head of velvet, antlers full of velvet when I saw him at 8 o'clock in the morning. This was about 10:30. And what he does was he stood up and he walked over in front of us and he started turning his head like this, grab it with his mouth and pull it off and eat it. Or you shake his head and as it comes off, he'll grab it in his mouth and pulls it off and consumes it. The only part that they don't, or any time I found it in the bushes when it's dropped on the ground and they don't see it there. And you can see on this young chap right here, fantastic set of beams on him. But this is, if I was to find those antlers, they would still have that velvet, still very tight still on the animal. How do we age them? What we do is, this is just a 1.5 years old. You can see the permanent tooth coming in right here. And we take these middle two teeth, as I'll show you in a minute, and grind them up and count the rings on the root, just like you do on a tree. Look at the atypical wear on this tooth right here, this jaw here. If I was to take all of the moose jaws that I have collected in Manitoba over the years and put them in a room, I can pick out with 90% confidence the ones that come from the west side of the province, Riding Mountain, Duck Mountain country, and because of this very atypical wear. What causes that? It's because of the high levels of cadmium that are present in the shales around Old Glacial Lake Agassiz in Manitoba. Aspen picks up shales and it accumulates at about 10% more than you see in other, tenfold more than you see in other tree species. And I work with Bill Young from the University of Australia in Queensland, and what the cadmium does is weakens the enamel on the teeth. So you see this very atypical wear, and he sees it on sheep that are on range in Australia with very high cadmium levels. And this is how we age them. We take two grindstones that are going like this and pull the tooth up between it, grind it down, and this is just a 1.5 years old, a 3.5, and a 13.5. And you can see how the center part fills in. So when I'm aging those, a dark ring will be the winter growth line, where a more translucent one is the summer growth one. And so I just, easier to count the dark lines. And so it's from the spring of the year, so we add a shot in the fall, so we add that half a year in to it. And sometimes you'll see something like this, where a stick gets stuck between the teeth here, and you get these bone lesions, osteoporosis here, and eventually that'll just wear right through, and that's the end of the game. Now, you notice this guy, he's the younger bull, he's still got the rope portion on here, and he's parallel antler structure, and whoops-a-daisy, gee whiz. That's the urinary bladder from a bull moose. That will fill a great big pop bottle, okay? And it's really quite fascinating. Bull moose urine really turns the cows on right now. It is phenomenal. What they will do, they will try and dig a little bit and try and urinate. Dig a little bit more and try and urinate. And they never urinate until the 7th time. It is phenomenal. And if you read Peterson's 55 Moose book, I think my dad has a quote in there. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. 7th time. Then he'll stand back and he'll splash his feet in and go like this. And you'll see piloerection in the hairs on the bell, so that they can get that urine in there and to the base of the hairs, and it's retained in there for a longer period. And you watch in the video that I was mentioning we just did with my granddaughter, I have footage of a cow coming up and nuzzling him in the bell area. And you'll watch these bulls urinating these things, and this cow is there. She'll come over and she'll give the big boy a lifter right you know where, almost buckles his knees, and to get that urine on her. It's fascinating. I had my granddaughter with me this day, and she says, "Grampy, big bull." There was a great big bull alongside the road. It's a funny little story. And anyway, I said, he walked up and he started making the wallow, and the cow was feeding, and I said, "Watch this, sweetheart, because not very many people are going to see this." And he did the same thing. It was fantastic. So I got it on video and take a bunch of pictures, but then we get in the truck after. She phones her grandmother and said what we saw and whole business, and she said, Grandma, she said, "Grampy gets so excited when he sees this." Anyway, they don't have any teeth in the top, but there's a hard pad there. Right back of that hard pad, there's two little wee openings that go into an organ that we call Jacobson's organ. So what he was doing here, he was sniffing at the cow to see if she's receptive. And he's able to discern from sniffing that she's receptive, and he will step forward and breed her. Now, talking with colleagues in Alaska, they can get maximum in utero productivity with about 20 or 25 bulls per 100 cows, because the big bulls here will gather harems. Down in where I work in Manitoba, and I did something across the country a few years ago for the Cane Forestry Association, generally we try and have about 60 to 65 bulls per 100 cows, because our bulls generally don't gather harems. Now, if you were to take, try and drive a spike through one of these antlers here, big spike, probably going to take you 4 or 5 spikes till you get it through. A fellow brought in a set of antlers one day to show me, and there was about 3 inches sticking out the back side. So that just shows you the force that these things come together with fighting, and I've videoed that. It is absolutely phenomenal. And sometimes this happens with locked antlers, and that's the end of the game. Okay. When does breeding occur? I probably collected more reproductive tracts for moose and elk than most people have in the country. And what I found was that the average breeding day, where about 22% of the animals are bred about the last 2 or 3 days of September. The earliest I found one breeding was on August 21st, and the latest on November 21st. And on November 21st, the fetus is the size of my thumbnail. I have it in a vial at home. By about October the 10th, it's basically all over by that time, if you have a normal bull-cow ratio, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And, oh, geez. A friend of mine sent me these photographs from Alaska where a cow was given birth in his backyard. And sometimes they have one, and sometimes 2. I've seen 3. A fellow that I know sent me a Polaroid picture he took in the Boundary Waters Canoe area of Minnesota, and this girl had 4. And she was a real good mom because she still had all 4 with her on the middle of September. And of all of the ones I've looked at, I've only seen 3 anomalies. This one here, he's only going to have 3 legs. This one guy over here, he's going to have to stand on a stump to have a drink. And this here is a cyclops moose. It has one big eye right in the middle of the head here, great big ears on it, and a big flap of skin where the mouth was, and I have him at home in a vial, or a big bottle. Now, I like to, when I've gone to the First Nation communities, in particular Manitoba, I like to keep it simple, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So what do a little modeling here. What I've said is we got a cow with twins on the landscape. One is the twins is a bull, one is a cow. We have no mortality. A cow produces a single, the calf when she turns 3, twins when she turns 5, a 50-50 sex ratio, and we're going to run it for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, we have 41 moose in the landscape. In the real world, we might have, what, maybe 25? Something like that? Well, let's go back and do the same thing again. Vince Crichton goes out and shoots that cow moose. The bull calf dies, and the female lives, and we have a bull out here to do the breeding. At the end of 7 years, we got 11 moose. In the real world, we have not maybe 2, 3. That points out the significance. If you want to grow moose populations, you have to make sure you've got females there, and high number of females, and calf survival. And now, if recruitment equals mortality, and when I say recruitment, I mean the number of animals that are surviving to 1 year of age and entering the adult population. So if recruitment equals mortality, we got a steady situation here. If recruitment exceeds mortality, it's going up. And that's what I say to when I go to the First Nation communities. I say, you know, if more people are being born or moving on to the reserve, then your population is going to increase. On the contrary to that, if it's going down, depending on what it is, we got lowering populations, and that's what's happened in Manitoba right now. You know, we're right now in Manitoba in the whole province down to about 12,000 moose, which is a damn disgrace. Now, this is what the social structure of a moose population looks like. We got lots of calves and less of these guys in here and less of these guys and not many of these older ones. The same on the bull side. And what I did is when I took 1 year of data when I was a regional wildlife biologist, and you see basically the same thing. We should have had more calves being shot by hunters here, but when hunters back then would see a bull and or a cow and a calf, they shoot the bigger animal, leave the calf go. Now, what I did is this, and this is very important. I just arbitrarily put those black lines across there. When populations go down, everybody above that line is gone. We don't have as many calves produced, many juniors here, and these most productive females. And all the reproductive stuff that I have from one area in Manitoba, all these old girls out here, not very many of them out there, but every one of them was had twins. And of all of the female reproductive tracts I've looked at in Manitoba from 2.5 years of age on up, I've only ever found 2 that weren't pregnant. One was a 15-year-old cow and said, hey, I did enough for the moose world. No more. I had one 12-and-a-half-year-old cow, had never been bred in her life. Just like there's some in our society, there's some females that can't conceive, and the same thing happened there. So I did the same thing with my age data. Everybody above that, as populations go down, everybody above that line is basically gone. And that's the importance of maintaining, larger populations. So you've got a lot of these old girls here that are producing the twins. Now, let's talk a little sex. Those are sperm from a bull moose. A friend of mine gave this paper in 2014 in Alaska at the Moose Conference, and it was absolutely phenomenal. The first time we've ever seen it. What he did was, this is a normal sperm here. These are atypical or abnormal sperm from the young bulls, and you'll notice the ring around the tails. Some of them are small, not fully developed. The tails are broken, etc. And remember, she only comes into season for 30 hours. If she's not caught in that 30-hour period, she's going to cycle again 30 days later. So these atypical sperm that we see here, they can't swim normally in those seminal fluids. This happened in the Prince George area. Some of you may know my good friend up there, Kenny Childs, and published in the late 80s. All he had left in the moose population was 1.5-year-old bulls. They had their breeding population spread out over about 12 weeks. He worked with the late Dr. Tony Bubenik, and when this was presented in Alaska, I stood up and I said, Tony Bubenik just stood up in his grave and he said, yes, yes, yes. This is what I've been talking about. Why you got to have the mature bulls out there. And anyway, but Kenny worked with Dr. Tony, and in the space, so they said the only thing he could shoot, I think, was minimum 50-inch spread and had to have 3 or 4 brow points. And they protected those young bulls coming up. In the space of a I don't know, 3 years or something, they reduced that breeding season by about 50%. Now, people have said to me over in Manitoba, they said, well, 100 moose, Vince, that's enough to turn it around. I said, just a minute now. Take a minute here. So what I did is I went and took some of my 100 moose, but I used the percentage of bulls, cows, and calves in there from data that I collected, and I know it's right. So, and remember, out of these cows here, there's going to be some that are 1.5 year olds that aren't breeding. The odd one breeds, but to make the point. And in December, when we do our surveys, we got 9 calves that are there, assuming that they live to make 1 year of age and get into the adult population. That's not enough to offset predation, disease, accidents. The bottom line is, when you get to those numbers out there, these populations will never, ever recover in your lifetime or mine. Now, some of the other things that we see over there, and I know you have these guys out here, winter tick, and this is what we call the ghost moose. Dr. Bill Samuels wrote a really interesting book called White as a Ghost. And anyway, I counted ticks with Bill 1 year on moose, and calves of the year born in the spring, when it was bad for ticks, we found an average of 56,000 on calves, 39,000 on cows, and 29,000 on bulls. And sometimes you have some really interesting things taking place out there. This was likely maybe, I don't know, but maybe injured during the rutting period. We have railroads, accidents, drowning, etc. Others. This here is really interesting, and this is what I have here. I was telling the boys yesterday I had a little surprise for them, but I wasn't going to show it to them until today. What happens here is when bulls have got just one shed, the other is such an irritant, they'll go up and they'll bang it against the substrate, and part of the skull comes off with it, as you can see here. And I've seen this with deer in the city of Winnipeg, the same thing. So that gives an opening where you could put in some of them, I could put 2 fingers right into the cranium. Now, I haven't found any dead moose in the bush because they're in remote areas, but I've seen it in deer in the city of Winnipeg. You look at cut the cranium open, it's amazing what you see. A friend of mine over, a member of the legislature in Manitoba, he's a licensed antler buyer, and we have a paper coming out shortly on it. About 10% of the deer and moose have a large chunk like this on it, or maybe just a little piece of bone. But it's quite phenomenal to see this, and some of them, I kid you not, and that would explain why in some years, or almost every year I see it, you'll see say in July or June, you'll see an antler maybe a foot long on one side, there's nothing growing on the other side. So what happens is damage that pedicle area, the growing area, and we don't have we have no antler growing there. Okay, brainworm. Luckily, you don't have it out here. Manitoba is about the western edge of it in Canada. And that's my late professor from the University of Guelph, Dr. Roy Anderson, who found out what was causing moose to go running around in circles, etc., in parts of northwestern Ontario. Okay, and this is what I do with, in the course I teach over there, part-time for the university. I take a deer head and I split it right in half, and I pump out both sides of the brain, and you can see a male worm down here and a female worm right here. 50% or 100% of the deer in the city of Winnipeg and east are infected with a brainworm. And you get young population, young moose are very susceptible to this thing, and that's when this gets in moose, it's the end of the game. With deer, it doesn't affect them at all. There it is. There we are. Okay. You know, some of the things that slideshow from the beginning. There we are. Anyway, I was getting that to come up here. this cow with the calf here, mom's just into it to her knees here about, but look at the little guy, he's into it right up to his belly. These things, I'm sure you people know what these are. These wolves certainly do cause a major problem. And sometimes here, tables are turned. You can see this cow putting the boots to a timber wolf. Somebody sent me that photograph. And these guys down here, bears, have they take a lot of calves in the spring of the year. And I mean a lot. Okay, here's a summary of the mortality sources. Bears and wolves, vehicle accidents, trains, drowning, etc., brainworm, periodically ticks in certain areas, liver fluke, licensed hunting, unregulated hunting, old age, climate change. I put all those question marks there because I'm not 100% convinced yet that climate change is having an impact on moose. If it was, why do we have moose going through the roof in southern Saskatchewan, out in the open prairie area? Well, I got this information from Lauren Scott, former Minister of Agriculture in Saskatchewan, and the Executive Director of the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation. In the 60s, they had 140,000 small farms there. In 2010, at a meeting in Winnipeg, he told me it was 40,000. In 2014, 35,000. And by 2020, it's projected to go below 30,000. And so what the people over in Saskatchewan said is that there was an unreported, a farmer over here would poach one and a farmer over here, and that's what kept the population down. And what has happened here, when the populations are down here, but you take away all that mortality of all those farmers poaching them out there, and eventually, you have a population that went up like this, and when you get up here, it's limited probably by habitat limitations, etc. But that's basically what's happened in southern Saskatchewan. It happened in southwest Manitoba also. The problem we had in Manitoba is that the former premier out there, he gave Métis the same rights as Treaty Indians. And according to many people that pass information to me, they're the ones that really have knocked the dickens out of moose in southwestern Manitoba. Now, some of the interesting things that moose eat, they like red osier dogwood, yellow water lily. This is ground up red osier dogwood. There's a family up in Swan River that's working on this, and they find that red osier dogwood is very good for things such as minimizing the effects of MS, as well as prostate cancer. And and so I have a couple bags of this at home, and right now I understand the Chinese are interested in putting money into more research in this area. And sometimes in severe winters, like we've had over there right now, they'll turn to barking on trees and pull the bark off, and then they will also eat. You can see here they ripped it off on trees that have fallen down where you and I could go in and pull off the bark. They'll even eat that in severe winters, and I've seen moose do this as well as elk, and you can always tell by the shape of the tooth on here whether it's moose or elk that is doing it. And forest fires. It certainly produced some good moose habitat, and the here's a fire that went through on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. Now, the east side of Lake Winnipeg in the boreal shield, it doesn't have very much soil there. So when you get these rock ridges that are burned off, it's going to take hundreds of years until soil gets back there. You do have some pretty good habitat left around the edge of these wet areas here, but it takes a long time for the soil to come back on those areas yet. You get further east in the boreal shield, it gets a deeper soil profile. You also get blowdown like this, and light coming to the ground, and you get some really good habitat coming back after that. And logging, certainly, you know, they cut these trees out here. Look at all the new growth that's coming up in those areas. Okay, and what we did with the forest companies working over in Manitoba, years gone by, they go in and log this area, and everything be knocked flat. So we went after them and said, look, you got to leave this non-productive stuff there. So now they go into these areas with their feller bunchers, etc., and leave all these, what I call wildlife trees, leave them standing there and not knock them down as they had done in the past. And mineral licks. They go into these mineral licks, especially starting about around the 1st of June, and going to replenish those mineral licks. Particularly, emphasis has been on sodium over the last number of years. Now, these confounded things. You remember, moose have not changed since he walked across the Bering Land Bridge. He's still got antlers, 4 feet in fur. But look what we got. Cars and trucks and snow machines, Argos, ATVs, aircraft, lights, the whole thing. And these confounded things called roads. What chance does he have? Increased access. You know, he hasn't got a hope. And so what we did in Manitoba is we started going and blocking roads like this here, pulling out culverts, but you know, you got snow machines, etc., going down these areas in the winter period. Okay, so what I did over there, we started ripping roads. And I didn't rip them to the first corner there, I ripped them for a full kilometer. The good Lord himself couldn't get down those roads. And some people complained. So we wanted to get back. I said, what do you want? Do you want moose, or do you want to be able to get back in and shoot the last one? And then we did up this, oh geez, this thing's too fast for me. Anyway, what we did is we did up a brochure and we sent it around to all the First Nation communities in Manitoba and to try and get them on side. Now, before I retired, about a month before I walked out the door, I had nothing to lose. The minister, when I was presenting season proposal to him that year when we were finished, he said, Vince, he said, I'd like to talk moose. I said, hey, good subject. So he and I got into it. I said, you should be taking a line from the Paw in northwestern Manitoba to Beset over on the east side over here. South of that line, no moose hunting. Vince, I don't want to go there. So we got into some other things, and I pointed my finger at him and I said, then that is the legacy that you are leaving for the people of Manitoba. You don't want to do anything. And I'm telling you right now, that is the wrong approach. And the Manitoba chapter of the Wildlife Society, I'm involved in that committee, but I wasn't involved in this. They did up a map basically showing the same thing. And I talked to our current minister on January 17th. She wanted to, oh, geez. I talked to her on January 17th. She wanted to talk to me, and we got into it. I told her the same thing. And you know, whether she'll and the staff will listen, I don't know right now, but if they continue on with the same thing, we're going to be in even more difficulty. And this just gives you an indication of what happened up in the Duck Mountains in western Manitoba. You know, in about 1993, we had over 33,000 moose. When we, down here in 2011, we were down to around 1,000 animals. And what we did here, we put a conservation closure in place. That means under sparrow. That means nobody, and I mean nobody, can hunt. We did that in 4 game hunting areas in Manitoba, 3 on the west side and 1 on the east side. Now, over on the east side in Area 26, next to Ontario, this is an area that I used to survey years ago, part of my region. There's lots of moose in there. Now we've only got moose in the top end of it, lots of deer in the south end here. Moose will never come back there. We never had very many deer back in the 70s when I was a regional wildlife guy here, but all of these deer over here are infected with brainworm. So moose just will not come back. Now, what we did, we had a Happy Lake trial management area over there where we, no access. And what we did then, we closed it in '96 and we built up the moose population in the area to about 117. Then the government decided, against my good, recommendation, open it up. Look what happened. And has continued to go down ever since then. And now, before I came to the province in '72, in some of these areas, they were, in a space of a 2-week period in December, they're shooting about 400 or 500 moose. The department then put in designated routes. Hunters could only go on certain routes with their vehicles. Once they shot an animal, they take the vehicle in and haul it out and that. And in 1980, I went bulls only across the province, and except in a few select areas. And basically since then, the harvest in Manitoba has been bulls only, and it's continued to go down to where we are today. And the big issue, and hey, I'm going to be upfront and honest with you, the big issue was the unregulated harvest. And that's by, when Canada turned over to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta in 1930, under the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, paragraph 13, it said that the native people could, the province would guarantee them the right to hunt for food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we got no regulations on them. And you just cannot maintain populations, if you've got one element that there's no restrictions on you. So in the Duck Mountains, what I said was anything below 1,000 animals, absolutely no hunting. Up here, you can back off a little bit, and up here, you can back off a little more. Now, down here, in the ducks, we've got that population now up to about 1,700 or 1,800, and I told the minister the other day, before you open that again, there has to be regulations that apply to everybody. And after the second International Moose Conference, I came back to Manitoba, and I thought, well, I'll get in touch with an economist over there, see how much moose are worth to the province. And so the total came out to, basically in a 3-week period, almost $8 million. And, that was in 1985 dollars. So, if you take the subsistence out of it, there's a substantial amount of money that's spent in basically a 3 or 4 week period on moose in Manitoba. And today, we're down to about 2,000 hunters today from a high of about 11,400. And so if you translate, if we had that moose resource today, it'd be a heck of a lot more than we're seeing here. Now, this is really interesting. I don't know what planet some of my former staff over there and senior people are on. They're not just on the moon, they're way out in Pluto. The average number of moose on the west side of the province, excluding the Duck Mountain, the Porcupine Mountain, is 104 moose. The average with where we have hunting seasons is 133 moose. How do they justify hunting on a population of 50 moose? Blows my mind. Now, this area 16 here in red, I tried to close that in 1974, and I was told I was a new kid in the street and didn't know what I was talking about. Well, I got it closed the next year. We did a survey, in 1,700 square miles, all burned, 9 moose. 81, we surveyed, a little different technique. Upper confidence interval was 56 moose. In 2010, some of the regional people told me, they said, well, we're seeing lots of moose and we're doing caribou surveys, Vince. I said, well, before I'm going to sanction a season, I want to do a survey. But I said, where do they come from? Walking across or swimming across Lake Winnipeg? I don't think so. So anyway, did a survey, 100 moose. We used a little different, re-stratified at this time. So basically, it has not, it never will increase. It's basically a population that will, has never increased and never will with the current regime that we have over there. Oh, geez.
The
Okay. The Area 17A on the east side, the department did a survey last winter, 383 moose. So I'm just going to go down to the bottom here. The number of moose that would be alive this coming December is 18 calves. You know, if they live to 1 year, there has to be, pardon me, a conservation closure there immediately. Even one of the regional people over there said the thing, and this is what I told the minister the other day. You've got to shut it down right now. If it goes down any further, it's going to be even more into the hole. Now, I didn't take the low end or the high end. I just took their point estimate. And, you know, they're just, that's the issue that we've got. So here's discussion points I put forward to the minister. You've got to protect cows and calves. No hunting. Absolutely no hunting at all. More conservation closures. And these were just discussion points. I said offer outfitters 2 to 3 bear tags per hunter when they bring in the non-residents from the U.S. It means more dollars in the province. They do it in Saskatchewan. A free bear and wolf tag to licensed Manitoba hunters. These are all time-bounded. And an incentive to register trappers. Before I retired, what we said in the duck and those conservation closure areas, we said any registered trapper that goes and shoots a wolf, will pay him $250. I couldn't go and get the $250, but for that he had to turn in a hair sample, a piece of tongue, a piece of bone, and a piece of muscle. And and the other thing is close hunting of moose by non-residents, non-Canadians. Yes, it affects the outfitting business, but hey, last in, first out. I suggest to you that residents have more that's the word I'm looking for. Priority to than non-residents. And I said, remove packs of timber wolves. Go in and remove them. You know, and I said these are all time bounded until the things turn around. Okay, so the issues are this. Politics, right now it's politics, but before science, but we've got to flip that around. Politicians got to listen to us. They're de facto ignorance of, you know, the processes out there on the landscape. Listen to us. Don't ignore us. Politics are, you know, they're teachers and lawyers and everything else. They don't understand this stuff. Hunting, there must be enforceable legislation that is applicable to everybody. And I mean everybody. Hunting small populations? No. Challenge the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, and when we started consultation over there, the Director of Constitutional Law, I sat with her at lunch one day, and she said, Vince, I'm tired of listening to talk about moose. She said, within 2 years, we got to challenge the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement in 1930. Nothing has been done since then, and I talked to her just recently, and I said, I'm holding you to that. The issue is increased access. Maturing habitat on the east side of Lake Winnipeg, Pine Falls Paper Company is shut down. It's going into caribou habitat. The unregulated hunting. We need a team approach, and the cost of doing nothing, you know, is okay. What we need is, go back to that other one. Can you flip me back to that other one? And what we need is a provincial plan with goals and objectives. And proactive strategies and resources. But we have a shared management plan. Get everybody at the table. Treaty Indians, Métis, licensed hunters, you know, the Manitoba Wildlife Federation, the lodge and outfitters. Get everybody at the table. Develop terms of reference. I've had members, you know, do groups that are in the west, southwest, east, Interlake, but have knowledgeable moosers sit on the thing. We don't want some of these politically appointed bureaucrats that are in there, you know, skewing the thing one way or the other. So we want reps for licensed hunters, First Nations, Métis, and everybody has to take a responsibility. We have to be respectful, honest, and transparent. I had to put this thing up here. I've had lots of fun with this thing. That big set of beams I got puts me in the upper echelon of the moose world. And, you know, I put those things on and I can go and rock and roll. I can put the boots to these young guys out there, and the bigger guys, I got to back up. I got to watch myself, okay? But on one occasion, my wife has me on video. I had a young teenager wanted to have a go at me one day, and I really had to watch myself. But, you know, conservation is a topic that shouldn't be just talked about. It has to become a way of life. And that is just, you know, I can't stress that enough. Okay, last slide, or second last one. You know, the future of wildlife is ours to make, not predict. And I have a dream. My dream is to make sure that that little sweetie has the same opportunity to use those resources as you and I have, and your children and your grandchildren. And who speaks for the moose? I do. Who's with me? Oh yes. Oh yes, class dismissed. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm not kidding. I want more people to become involved with us, and the only way we're going to do something is for people to get in that same canoe and start paddling in the same direction. I'm around willing to talk. Thanks very much.